here's what we're going to cover today. And I just wanted to stress, in addition to looking at the strategies, investments, internal activities, looking at market minefields, looking at who's going to lead and lag in this market, I just wanted to stress why we're looking at India for India today. First, it's been growth. It's been Indian economy growth that's been sustained, that it's continuing. And that might be weird to say that's a reason to look at India with new eyes or new perspective, but sometimes you do have to step back and take that 10,000-foot view and consider continuity is actually a trend. Second is what we're seeing and hearing from the companies that we cover. They are talking about India differently, so we feel we need to look at India differently too. And so here's who it is that's presenting today. You don't see Kelly's sweater, unfortunately, with her pumpkins in this picture, but that's us. And as I mentioned companies and the companies we're seeing and hearing from and that we cover, because that is how we do our research. The companies first, the business models, the strategies, and the performance. I'm going to come back to this in just a minute, but I just want to stress that when we talk about companies, we're talking about them because that's the way that we cover the broader market. So this slide sort of perfectly captures how we're thinking about India right now. This is kind of our overall theory, our problem statement, our debate point. This is where we're at on India on one simple slide. And that said, there's a lot of nuance in here. There's plenty of different paths that we could explore. One obvious point here is that while the India market looks appealing because of the growth I mentioned earlier, the companies seeing opportunities have very long-standing competitive relationships, and it's not going to be easy for any one company to grab and hold share of that new demand for IT services and consulting. We will come back to that towards the end when we talk about some of the differences between the companies that we're seeing and the differences in the strategies and the approaches that they're using as they see this growth opportunity in India. So again, before we dive into India specifically, I do want to explain a little bit about how technology business research looks at the world. And if you're new to a TBR webinar, or if you're new to TBR overall, this is super important to understand. These two charts perfectly capture the perspective that we bring to the IT services and consulting markets, how the players are performing individually and how they're performing relative to each other. So the bubble size represents revenue. Revenue growth and op margin make up the x-axis and the y-axis. And if you look closely enough at the chart on the right, you'll see that EY is bigger than Accenture. The EY revenue bubble is bigger than the Accenture revenue bubble. And many of you will think that's insane because EY is clearly smaller than Accenture. But we're looking in this particular bubble chart at just management consulting revenues. And in order to do a meaningful benchmark, we need to have our own taxonomy. We need to be able to compare apples to apples. And so that's, again, how we look at the world of our research. It's company by company, broken into our taxonomy so we can make comparisons that are meaningful. And we're always thinking about that business model, the strategy, and the performance. So with that, let's go on to India itself. And we'll start off with the strategies, investments, internal activities that have been used to develop in the increasingly changing Indian market. So we'll start with Kelly first, and then Jill, and then I'll weigh in again. Kelly?
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you all for joining today. So first off, we wanted to call out some of the changes in the hiring and training patterns in India. Obviously, we've seen a lot more training around AI, digital, particularly around Gen AI technologies, such as for Google Cloud, Gemini, and other areas. I wanted to call out HCL to start. HCL has definitely created more of an emphasis on freshers over the past few years. In their fiscal 2025, which ends in March of 26, their goal is to hire 10,000 additional freshers. So we're about halfway through their fiscal year at the end of 3Q, which just ended. They actually achieved half of their goal. They hired around 4,000, almost half their goal. They hired around 4,000 freshers in total so far this fiscal year. And in doing that, they're really trying to bring in the freshers as a more prominent part of their strategy and their culture to help bring in those new ideas, drive innovation, as well as their overall portfolio and client management direction. So helping with the sales efforts, helping to develop their portfolio and ensure that they're more well aligned moving forward and just being able to support delivery and engage better with those clients. Wipro actually has similar plans. They're planning to hire around 10,000 to 12,000 freshers over that same period. Overall, Wipro's headcount has actually been trending downward during 2023 and then thus far into 2024. They did report a very slight sequential headcount increase during this past quarter, but the declines are more reflective of their company's efforts to improve its cost structure, help remove those redundancies, and create more agility across the firm, so helping them to just be more agile to be able to invest in those other technologies. Aside from the talent count changes, they've also been executing on training efforts and even announced that around 44,000 of their current employees are actually trained around advanced AI. And so with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jill.
All right. So yeah, really building off Kelly's point here, companies are now looking at India as not only a place for low-cost outsourcing, they're now looking at them for a place to really bring innovation. And so there's a few different reasons for this. The first being really taking hold of this low-cost opportunity with this persistent macroeconomic uncertainty, as well as tightened discretionary spending, which has lasted for quite some time at this point. And another reason is the migration from China into India for bringing innovation. So, for example, IBM has recently announced the closure of many of its research and development centers within China and plans to move them over to India. And so another reason for this is a lot of US-based companies overall are really pulling out of China to really stop their dependency on China. And so with all of this coming together, vendors are using this as an opportunity to provide innovation in India for India, which really allows these companies to form relationships and offer competitive and high quality services domestically.
So I want to highlight to just reinforce two things that Jill and Kelly have just said, and that's how looking at the individual actions of the individual companies is how we sort of begin to see the patterns that have been developing in India. And so I just want to talk very quickly 2 points on partnering and building specific capabilities. First, what's happening in India reflects strategies that companies are deploying globally. So that's not surprising maybe, but what we've seen for the past few years is that GSIs, the global systems integrators, and the global consultancies, and by this I mean the BCGs and the Deloittes and the rest, they've usually taken a different approach to their more mature markets, to Europe, to the US, than they have to other markets. But we've seen a change. We've seen a change in recent years where their strategies and their expectations for what they're going to get out of different moves around partnering in particular are being more aligned to a global approach. Yes, they still have the local and the regional nuance as they do everywhere, but increasingly the partnering, and when I say partnering, I keep saying it, what I mean is the technology alliance partners like the hyperscalers. It's a more globally aligned activity. It requires global leadership attention. And then on specific capabilities, we're also seeing a more focused effort on finding the right capabilities to build in India for the India market, not just an extension of what's working elsewhere or bringing IP or bringing software products or platforms or just services designed elsewhere and tested elsewhere to the Indian market. Instead, we're seeing capability building, again, often aligned with the technology partners, that is purpose built for the Indian market. And so on both of those points, it would be easy to say, hey man, this has been happening for a long time. But what we're seeing is that it's a different kind of focus, an intentionality on the part of these companies. And that comes back to what I mentioned earlier about seeing continuity as a larger trend in and of itself. So the next thing we're going to talk about are some of the market minefields and some of the systemic challenges that may make all the positivity we've been talking about a little bit more tricky. So we'll start with Jill, talk about some of the infrastructure weaknesses. I'll talk a little bit about the government in the market, and then Kelly will talk about the local buyer.
All right, so getting started on infrastructure. So India is really struggling to build a robust enough infrastructure to meet the needs of its very fast growing economy. They've spent upwards of $1.5 trillion on their national infrastructure plan. And they have lots of things in place to build out their road networks and to build out other transportation things. But it's still not enough given the fast acceleration of their economy. So things like airports and bridges are often too small and in poor condition. And a lot of things are so overrun that they're having difficulty perform routine maintenance as well. And so for things like their road networks and trains, those are also having a lot of problems with gridlock, and there's such high transit times that it's really restricting the operational efficiency in the economy. With that being said, India is still going to grow, and it's still going to grow fast, but how well they address these issues is really going to determine their growth potential. And so kind of building off that here, India has also invested a lot in its digital infrastructure, and has had a lot of success with that. And so one of the ways they did this was through their digital payment platform, the Unified Payment Interface, which allows for cashless payments, which allows things to become much more easy and much more trustworthy, in addition to having digital identification for Indian citizens, which really does help with financial services and access to the economy.
Excellent. And Jill, one of the things about that, I mean, it really is amazing that a country of that size can have a unified digital payment system. It's incredible, especially considering how much of the economy is not in the formal economy. And then I will say there's one thing I wish this was like a show notes thing, like a podcast, Haley, that we could include. But there was a phenomenal New York Times article about that just profiled one truck driver's attempt to bring a load in his truck from one city in northern India down to a port in southern India, and just all the complications that Jill was talking about. I do want to talk about government participation really in two ways. One positive, one negative. So the way that the Indian government has set very clear national strategic goals and imperatives around the economy and around infrastructure makes it very clear for companies which industries will get essentially government money and attention, where the government supported growth is going to be. That is unquestionably a good thing, especially for IT services companies and consultancies that can then plan accordingly. And we've heard from multiple consultancies how their own industry specialization that they bring to the table is focused on those industries where they know the government is investing, where they know the government sees it as a strategic priority going forward. So that's a positive. But then there's also the negative, where you get government interference, too heavy a hand, favoring specific companies, shielding politically connected enterprises, and of course, creating bureaucratic hurdles that are simply too big to overcome. That said, of course, the Indian government is no more immune from good and bad policies or good and bad investments or good and bad actions as any other government. What we think is important is the clarity. That's really critical for businesses to see where the opportunities are going to be and see where they should be making their biggest bets. And we see that the clarity that's coming out of the Indian government with respect to which industries are most important for the country as a whole, we think that's enormously important, and we think that's going to help the consultancies and the IT services companies that we look at do really well over the next few years. So with that, I will turn it to Kelly.
Thank you, Patrick. So taking a look more closely at the local buyers and how the local vendors are kind of trying to take advantage of those opportunities and how they're looking to engage more. A lot of the India-centric vendors have not really pursued local opportunities in India to try to engage more closely with those local buyers. More recently, we've seen a stronger push around the expansion of India-based and local engagement centers. Wipro, for example, they opened an experience center in India focused around IoT, and the center will focus on engaging with those India-based clients to help increase the collaboration, particularly around IoT, smart applications, which helps with manufacturing clients, a lot of those local vendors there. So trying to showcase the depth of its solutions. Using these centers, they can do that. They can immerse their clients within the environments and show them the potential and what they're actually able to do. Wipro's efforts to bring together some of that industrial and physical operations solutions, they can showcase them through those centers to actually show the possible of what they can do. And moving that, there's been more pressure from its peers, such as TCS, which is also built out those spaces in the region, and some of them are focused more closely on some of the existing and key clients, but they can also serve as an entry point to work with new clients as well. Cognizant as well, they've been training more employees around AI within the region, and so the centers, there's a center specific to AI. So Cognizant's going to open a Gemini studio within its existing cloud AI innovation hub within India, in other locations as well, but also in India. And so kind of tying it all back together with the training of the employees on those emerging technologies, but also giving them a space in the region, showcasing how they want to engage with that local buyer and actually see and meet those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think we've done a ton of research on these kind of centers in the past, and I think the pandemic sort of put a hold on that because a lot of these centers obviously had to change the way they were operating. And I think we've seen a resurgence of investment in these centers, and a lot of that resurgence is happening in India, not simply in the places that we've seen those kinds of innovation centers in the past. All right, so let's get to the leaders and laggards. Who do we think is actually really gonna win over the next few years in this space? Jill, I'll let you go first. Kelly, you'll go next, so I get to wrap it up. Jill?
Yeah, so when we look at how current IT service vendors are pursuing these local opportunities, two companies really come to mind for me, and that's IBM and Capgemini. So IBM is expanding its client reach by adding an experience zone with its partner Microsoft at one of its pre-existing client innovation centers. So really bringing together this sense of innovation with serving clients. And also IBM is also working with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for semiconductor research. And so then on the other hand, Capgemini has opened a new location in Gift City, which is focusing on technological innovation and development. And secondly, Capgemini is also working with the Noida Special Economic Zone to establish a center of excellence in skilling to work with unemployed adults and youths in need to really bring everything together for hiring within innovation. And so kind of bring this together, it's really important that IBM is showing its willingness to partner with its peers, specifically through government entities to really work together to develop India while also kind of capturing that market opportunity. That's really key. And Capgemini is also focusing on its local presence in specific places. And for example, Gift City is a tier 2 city, so trying to compete in different cities than its competitors.
Yeah, just one quick point on that before we go to Kelly. Capgemini has sort of a cultural legacy, a cultural history, a way of approaching the market by saying we want to be in a specific location for the specific talent that there is, specific opportunity that's there. So rather than open an office kind of just anywhere because everybody else is there, they spend an awful lot of time and effort in making sure that they're at the right physical location, the right zip code, as we would say in the US. And so I think that's an important thing to see, that that's overall global strategy is reflected in India as well. Kelly?
Yeah, so taking kind of a different approach to this, I wanted to call out HCL in this particular instance to take a look at how maybe potentially there are opportunities that are overlooked or being missed out. The company leverages a very strong client management strategy that definitely helps them to position their strategic business, execute on those long-term engagements, and make sure that they can stay connected with the clients in the long term, and even potentially serve as a transformation partner or more of a partner with the client. HCL's relationship beyond the contract approach, it really does showcase the flexibility, transparency, and co-innovation that HCL has with its clients. Well, this is all very supportive for HCL. It really does help them with maintaining those client engagements and moving forward. Sometimes the strict adherence to margin guidelines to ensure that it meets those ranges, it stays within that profit line. It can limit those opportunities, as it has indicated in the past. It would only focus on engagements that would fit within this range. While I'm sure it's a bit flexible in some instances, it could potentially lose out on some opportunities in India as a result if the margins are not aligning properly with the firm's goals. On the opposite side of the spectrum, and maybe a company that is a little different, I want to call out PwC here. Their cybersecurity services within India are definitely presenting opportunities for them, even competing against some of those India-centric peers that have a slight more advantage than PwC itself. Ongoing digital transformation projects and cloud migrations, application development and management services, as well as software adoption, they're all requiring more complex security architectures and frameworks, which is pushing for more complex security services. And while the opportunity is not necessarily called out, vendors can capture on these opportunities, even if they didn't do that transformation project or that cloud migration. And so PwC can really lean in on some of these on its own security managed services, which will help with the transformation, operations, implementation, as well as that management overall, to ensure that it can protect those environments and even win some market share against some of those peers.
Excellent, thanks. And I had the pleasure of going to India with PwC in the spring and hearing a lot about what's happening there. And I think that has really, in many ways, shaped our thinking about the potential in India when a firm like PwC talks about so all the big four firms are all member firms. When they talk about the Indian member firm being the fourth or third, or possibly even eventually second largest of the member firms, it tells you the expectations they have around growth. I just want to wrap up. We got one more slide after this, but in terms of looking at the competitive landscape, I just want to contrast the India-centrics and the big four firms. So when I say India-centrics, Wipro, TCS, Kelly mentioned HCL Tech, and then on the big four side, it's Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, EY. The India-centrics, they definitely have legacy presence, legacy everything, legacy capabilities. They have massive scale. They have, again, that Indian presence. They are Indian-based. And in contrast, the strengths that the big four bring to the market that's growing in India, one is around brand. I think you can't discount that, and it's brand not just for the Indian buyer that's looking for that big four brand, but it's also brand with respect to how the global alliance partners, how the Microsofts and the AWSs and the rest think about who they want to be partnered with in India. They're also, I know this is going to sound crazy to some people that know the big four well, they're also very agile. They have been able to adjust their capabilities, their offerings, what they're doing in India based on how the market is changing, perhaps more agile in India than they are in other places like the US and certainly the UK and Europe. So that is an advantage for them, at least in India. And then, of course, they have a much broader reach within clients. So the client persona of a big four firm is far more diverse within the enterprise than and I'm drawing that contrast to the India-centric vendors. So while the HCL Techs of the world are primarily focused on the CIO and the CTO and the IT director, the big four firms have permission to play with the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the C everything. So that I think is an advantage to them. So looking at those two, sort of where they come from their strengths, I think you look at, when we look at the Indian market, we see a changing customer, a changing buyer persona for IT services and consulting. So that obviously favors the big four firms. We're seeing this rapid growth that we talked about before, and even if it slows down a little bit, there's still a ton of growth in India. Well, honestly, that favors the India-centrics because that's where the scale comes into play. The global captive centers that we mentioned briefly at the beginning, those GCCs, where individual global enterprises are setting up their own IT and their own back offices essentially in India. Again, not a new thing, but it's kind of going through a resurgence right now. We actually think that probably favors the big four firms because the breadth of capabilities and the need to make the business case for the GCCs is something that the big four firms do really well. The evolving ecosystem, the way I've mentioned the hyperscalers a few times now, the way that the entire technology ecosystem is changing because of AI, because of cloud migrations, because of all the different emerging technologies that are no longer so much emerging. That evolving ecosystem, honestly, I can't say it favors one or the other. Both the India-centrics and the big four firm have become very adept at managing the evolving ecosystem. And then the last thing I would say is risk. And when you think of India, it's still an emerging market. There's still a lot of risk. There's still all the things Jill mentioned earlier about the infrastructure challenges. And when it comes to risk, I would say that actually favors the India-centric firms. They are the local presence. they probably have a greater appetite for the risks involved in India than perhaps the big four firms do. So the net of that, who's going to win out of all of that? I guess I would say not every one of these companies, not the 5 largest India-centrics, nor the big four firms. Not all of them are going to succeed. And so then I say, what are the characteristics of the leaders? It'll be sustained investment, so not retreating from India when things don't go perfectly as planned, relying very heavily on an ecosystem play, and then providing that global leadership support for the local opportunities. And when I say that, I mean bringing the global expertise that all of these companies have, but is spread around the world, and bringing that to India in the same way that they would bring global expertise and influence to their clients in London, their clients in New York, wherever it might be. So here we're summing it all up here, what it all means, the sort of implications for everybody. I don't know which of you two want to go first on this one.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll go ahead. I think there are lots of opportunities where you want to find opportunities. I think in India, there definitely are a lot for these India-centric vendors, for the consulting vendors. I think priorities around profit and revenue diversification can certainly overrule some of those ideas and potential perspectives, which can push them to either lose out or pursue other opportunities elsewhere. The development of a lot of these local centers, the expansion of the existing, and even the opening up of new centers has picked up, as Patrick has mentioned, following COVID, where it was all up in the air. The reinvestment of the centers is definitely an indication that these vendors are looking to capitalize on some of those local opportunities and improve their engagement in the region. It depends on the vendor, I think, who will be the most successful, what exactly they're showcasing, how they're showcasing, and how they're managing those client relationships. I think the centers that are being opened from a technology perspective around cloud, digital, AI, it's definitely helping these vendors to bring in clients across industry. They're not tied into a certain bucket, but they're still able to showcase the industry expertise from these local vendors, as well as ensuring that it can still bring in certain expertise, certain capabilities that can be tailored for and reproduced. It also helps to showcase the value of their portfolios, these investments, and really immerse the clients to help them envision direction, as well as business transformation products.
Yeah, so not too much to add on that. I think that one of the key takeaways here is as companies are really expanding their operations in India, they're looking to the local market. And I think something that's really crucial to that is to work with government entities and to work with developing skills to around innovation, and also to bolster its client outreach and client capabilities for India specifically.
Excellent, thanks. Honestly, the only thing I would add to that is that we have written extensively on India for India and the opportunities that are emerging there. As I mentioned, I traveled to India with PwC back in the spring, so we have a report on that. And Kelly and Jill have both published special reports on India, specifically on the consulting opportunities, specifically on the IT services opportunities growing in India, and specifically on pretty much everything we've talked about today. So if you have an opportunity to go find the special reports on those. And then before we have a couple questions in the queue and just a little bit of time left. Before we go to that, I just want to share this with everybody so they can see who we are, who uses our research, why people use our research, what the use cases are. We did do a use case webinar recently, a couple of weeks ago. Highly recommend taking a look at that, because it does explain, why do people listen to us and what is it that they're looking for and listening for. So you can understand that. The one question that we have in the queue that I will get to now, because again, we're almost out of time, is, do you think India's growth could slow? What are the possible negative scenarios? Great question, because we've been talking about nothing but the positive here. But Deloitte itself actually just recently published, it was Monday, predicting a slowdown in the next few years. I think others are as well, but even if it's slower, even if economic growth in India is slower in the near term, it's probably still going to be favorable than comparable markets. And I think that's increasingly important that we think of India as a comparable market to the US, to Europe, to the other, to Japan. And I know that's crazy to think of it, because in terms of size, it's not there. but in terms of importance globally and also in terms of the relative opportunity that the IT services vendors and the consultancies have. The worst case scenario for me, other than another pandemic, would be a massive political and societal instability that through sectarian violence. That could derail all of the economic progress, and it would just suck all the international investment right out of India. I think another negative scenario, kind of a creeping one, would be government interference that moves from, at the moment, kind of predictable and manageable, you sort of know what you're getting, to inconsistent, to incoherent, to damaging to the economy, especially if it's combined with a political realignment with countries like China, countries like Russia, other non-Western countries that don't have the same market principles in place. So that would be the two negative scenarios.